When you think of the Inca Empire, what comes to mind? Majestic stone cities like Machu Picchu, perched high in the Andes. Powerful emperors ruling a vast, organized territory. An empire that built incredible roads and structures without wheels or iron tools. For centuries, the Incas have fascinated us with their engineering marvels and sophisticated society. They built one of the most powerful empires in the pre-Columbian Americas, a testament to their strength and ingenuity. But behind the golden sun masks in the imposing stone walls lies a darker, more complex story. A story that is often whispered, a secret hidden behind a veil of religious devotion and imperial power. This is the story of the Acllahuasi, the chosen women, better known to history as the Virgins of the Sun. They were young girls, selected for a life of supposed honor, a life dedicated to the gods and the Sapa Inca. But what did this honor truly mean? What sacrifices were demanded of them behind the sanctified walls of the Acllahuasi? Today, we pull back that veil to uncover the tragic and compelling truth of the Virgins of the Sun, whose lives were shaped by duty, sacrifice, and the unyielding demands of an empire. To understand the Acllahuasi, we first need to understand the world they lived in. The Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, was a theocracy. Religion wasn't just a part of life, it was life itself. The Sapa Inca was not just a king. He was the living son of Inti, the sun god, the most powerful deity in their pantheon. The sun gave life, warmth, and prosperity. The entire empire revolved around pleasing Inti and the other gods. The Wakas, who resided in mountains, rivers, and sacred objects. Appeasing these divine forces was crucial for a good harvest, victory in battle, and the overall stability of the empire. And in this system, the Acllahuasi played a central, and ultimately, a very costly role. So who were these chosen women? Every year, imperial officials traveled to the farthest corners of the empire on a special mission. They weren't looking for gold or soldiers, they were looking for young girls. Specifically, they were searching for girls between the ages of 8 and 10, who were noted for their beauty, their physical perfection, and their noble lineage. These officials, known as the Apapanaka, would inspect the local communities, and the most promising young girls were selected. This was not a choice. It was a decree. Imagine being a young girl, playing in your village, when a high-ranking official points you out. Suddenly, your life is no longer your own. You are taken from your family, from everything you've ever known, and brought to the Acllahuasi, the house of the chosen women. These were convents, located in major Inca cities like Cusco, the capital. For the families, it was considered a tremendous honor. Their daughter was chosen to serve the sun god and the emperor. But for the girls themselves, it was the beginning of a life of complete isolation. Once they entered the Acllahuasi, they would rarely, if ever, see their families again. They were now the property of the state, their futures decided for them. Inside the Acllahuasi, the girls' lives were governed by strict routine and discipline under the watchful eyes of elder priestesses, called the mamacunas. Their education began immediately. They were taught the sacred rituals of the Inca religion. They learned to weave incredibly fine textiles from vicuna and alpaca wool. These weren't just ordinary clothes. The fabrics they created were considered sacred. They were used to dress the Sapa Inca, to adorn the statues of the gods, and to be burned as precious offerings. The quality had to be perfect. They also learned to brew chicha, a ceremonial corn beer, which was essential for every religious festival and ritual. Their days were filled with spinning, weaving, chanting, and praying. They were living in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury, but stripped of their freedom. Their primary duty was to maintain their purity. They were the Virgins of the Sun, and any violation of their vow of chastity was punishable by the most severe means. If a chosen woman was found to have broken her vow, she would be buried alive. Her lover, his family, and sometimes even his entire village, would be executed to erase the stain of his crime. The message was clear. Their bodies were sacred, belonging only to the sun god and the emperor. The Acllahuasi were divided into several categories based on their beauty, skills, and social status. The most beautiful and highborn were destined for the highest honors. Some became priestesses themselves, the mamacunas, dedicating their entire lives to serving the gods within the temple walls. They were the keepers of the sacred flame and the teachers of the next generation of Acllahuasi. Others had a very different, though equally prestigious, fate. They were chosen to become secondary wives or concubines for the Sapa Inca. As the son of the sun, the emperor had the right to claim any of the virgins of the sun for himself. To be chosen by the Sapa Inca was the ultimate elevation and status. It connected a woman's family directly to the divine ruler, bringing them immense prestige and political power. Another group of A-class was used as a tool of diplomacy. The Inca Empire was vast and diverse, held together by a complex system of alliances and obligations. The Sapa Inca would reward loyal generals, governors, and allied chiefs by gifting them a virgin of the sun as a wife. This was more than just a marriage. It was a political statement. It created a blood tie to the imperial center and ensured the loyalty of powerful men on the frontiers of the empire. For these women, their life of seclusion would end, only to be replaced by a new life in a strange land, married to a man they had never met, all in the service of the state. Their personal desires were completely irrelevant, but there was one final and most terrifying destiny that awaited some of these young women: the Capacoca ceremony. This was the most sacred and solemn of all Inca rituals, performed during times of great crisis of famine, a devastating earthquake, the death of an emperor, or a military defeat. It was a ritual of human sacrifice, and the purest, most perfect offerings the Incas had were the virgins of the sun. When a Capacoca was decreed, children were selected from all over the empire, often the sons and daughters of local lords, sent to Cusco as tribute. But among them, the Acllahuasi were considered especially potent offerings because of their purity and their close connection to the sun god. Those chosen for sacrifice were seen as messengers to the gods. They were not viewed as victims, but as honored envoys who would go to live with the deities and plead on behalf of their people. They were feasted and celebrated, dressed in the finest textiles and adorned with gold and feathers. They would then embark on a long pilgrimage, a solemn procession from Cusco to a sacred high-altitude mountain peak, sometimes hundreds of miles away. The journey itself was a ritual. Along the way, they were honored by communities who believed they were witnessing the procession of a living god. When they reached the summit, high above the clouds, a final ceremony took place. The chosen girl would be given a large amount of chicha, the ceremonial corn beer, to drink. This, combined with the altitude and the cold, would put her into a deep, unconscious state. She was then gently placed in a burial chamber, often seated as if still alive, surrounded by offerings of coca leaves, intricate figurines, and beautiful pottery. She was not violently killed, but rather left to freeze to death, a peaceful transition into the realm of the gods. In 1999, the world was stunned by the discovery of 3 incredibly well-preserved Inca mummies on the summit of Mount Lulilako, a volcano on the border of Argentina and Chile. One of them, a teenage girl nicknamed La Doncella, or the Maiden, was almost perfectly preserved by the ice. She was likely one of the A-class. Scientific analysis showed she had been well-fed and had consumed coca and alcohol in the weeks leading up to her death. She was found sitting peacefully, as if she had just fallen asleep. Her discovery gave a human face to the chilling practice of capacoca, a haunting reminder of the life of a young girl chosen for the ultimate sacrifice. The story of the Virgins of the Sun is a powerful and unsettling one. It shows us the duality of the Inca Empire, a society capable of incredible achievements but also of profound cruelty, all justified by religious belief. These young women were raised for a life of prestige and honor, but it was an honor that came at the cost of their freedom, their bodies, and, for some, their very lives. They were weavers of sacred cloth, brewers of holy beer, wives of kings, and finally, messengers to the gods. Their story is a crucial piece of the Inca puzzle, a reminder that behind the grand narratives of empires and emperors, there are always individual human lives, with their own hopes, fears, and silent sacrifices. They were called the Acllahuasi, the chosen women, or as history often remembers them, the Virgins of the Sun. In the vast and powerful Inca Empire, to be chosen was considered the highest honor a family could receive. These were young girls, some as young as 8, selected from across the empire for their beauty, their lineage, and their perceived purity. But what did it truly mean to be an Aclla? Was it a life of revered privilege, or a gilded cage of service and sacrifice? Today, we pulling back the veil of time to explore the hidden world of these sacred women who served the sun god and the emperor. Imagine being a young girl in a small village, nestled high in the Andes. One day, an imperial official arrives. He inspects all the young girls, and he points to you. Your family weeps, but they are tears of pride. You have been chosen. From that moment on, your life is no longer your own. You say goodbye to your parents, your siblings, your friends, knowing you may never see them again. You are now the property of the state, destined for a life of silent, sacred duty. This was the reality for thousands of girls across the Inca Empire. Their journey would take them to the Acllahuasi, or the House of the Chosen Women. These were grand, convent-like enclosures, located in major Inca cities, with the most prestigious ones situated in the capital, Cusco. Think of it as an elite, sacred boarding school, but one from which you could never graduate. Inside these walls, an entirely new life began, overseen by elder priestesses, known as the Mama. Here, the girls were stripped of their old identities, and began their rigorous training. They learned the intricate arts of weaving, creating the finest textiles in the empire. These weren't just ordinary cloths. They were masterpieces of kumbi fabric, made from alpaca and vicuna wool. So soft and finely woven they were considered more valuable than gold. These textiles were used for royal garments, religious ceremonies, and as high-status diplomatic gifts. The Aclla also learned to prepare sacred food and brew chicha, a fermented corn beer that was central to every single Inca ritual and festival. Their days were filled with chanting, prayers, and maintaining the eternal flame of Inti, the all-powerful sun god, who was considered the divine ancestor of the Inca Empire. Their lives were a continuous loop of devotion and skilled labor, all performed in seclusion, far from the eyes of the outside world. The Acllahuasi was a world run entirely by women, for a purpose dictated entirely by men. They were to be pure, silent, and obedient, the ultimate symbol of devotion to the empire. Now, the name Virgins of the Sun is a bit of a simplification. Not all Aclla were destined to remain celibate for life. In reality, they were sorted into several categories based on their physical beauty, social rank, and skills. The most sacred group. The true Virgins of the Sun were indeed considered earthly wives of the sun god Inti. They lived their entire lives in the Aclla, dedicated solely to religious service, and were expected to maintain their purity. For them, breaking this vow was the gravest sin imaginable, a direct insult to the god himself. The punishment was brutal and absolute, being buried alive. Her partner in the transgression would also face a grim fate, along with his entire extended family, his village potentially wiped from the map to erase the stain of his crime. The message was clear. The purity of the Aclla was tied to the very stability of the cosmos. But what about the other Aclla? A large number were designated for the Sapa Inca, the emperor. He could choose to take them as his secondary wives or concubines. Being chosen by the emperor was a huge honor that elevated the status of the woman's family. These women moved from the Acllahuasi to the imperial palace, entering a different kind of secluded world, one of courtly intrigue and royal duties. Their beauty and grace were now in service, not to a distant god, but to a living one. Then there was another category. These Aclla were used as political pawns, powerful tools in the Inca statecraft. The emperor would gift these highly educated and prestigious women as wives to loyal regional leaders, military generals, and other important men. This was a brilliant political strategy. It created blood ties between the central government in Cusco and the leaders of conquered territories, ensuring their loyalty and integrating them into the fabric of the empire. A marriage to an Aclla was a symbol of immense favor from the Sapa Inca, a reward that bound a man to the state for life. So, for many of these chosen women, their ultimate fate was not a life of quiet contemplation, but a strategic marriage arranged for the good of the empire. So, was it a good life? It's complicated. On one hand, the Aclla was spared. The backbreaking agricultural labor, that was the reality for most people in the Inca Empire. They lived in relative luxury, wore the finest clothes, and ate the best food. They were highly respected, almost revered figures in society. The Acllahuasi was a place where women held all the authority, a rare exception in a patriarchal world. They were educated, skilled artisans whose work was prized above all else. In a society with few paths for women outside of marriage and motherhood within their own communities, being chosen as an Aclla offered a completely different, and in some ways, elevated existence. But on the other hand, it was a life without freedom. These women had no say in their destiny. They were chosen without their consent, separated from their families forever. Their bodies, their skills, and their very lives were instruments of the state, to be used as the emperor saw fit. Whether they were dedicated to a god, given to the emperor, or married off to a stranger, their path was not their own. The immense pressure to remain pure, under threat of a horrific death, must have been a terrifying psychological burden. The walls of the Acllahuasi were as much a prison as they were a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and ornate, but a cage nonetheless. The system of the Aclla came to an abrupt and violent end with the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. When they conquered Cusco, they looted the Acllahuasi, just as they did the temples and palaces. The Spanish, with their own rigid Catholic views, saw the institution through a lens of misunderstanding, simultaneously intrigued and repulsed. The sacred women were scattered, the eternal flame was extinguished, and the house of the chosen women was eventually converted into a Christian convent, the Santa Catalina Monastery, which stands on the same spot in Cusco to this day. A place of female Inca devotion was replaced by a place of female Catholic devotion, one form of seclusion exchanged for another. The story of the Virgins of the Sun is a fascinating glimpse into the complex social and religious machinery of the Inca Empire. It shows how the state could control every aspect of life, even the most personal. It highlights the dual role of women as both revered religious figures and political commodities. They were artisans, priestesses, and symbols of imperial power, but they were also captives of a system that demanded their complete subjugation. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that behind the grand titles and golden legends of history, there are always human stories of sacrifice, devotion, and the quiet loss of freedom. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the Inca Empire. What do you think? Was being an Aclla an honor or a tragedy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from our incredible past. See ya next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're journeying back in time, deep into the heart of the Andes Mountains, to explore one of the most fascinating and complex aspects of the mighty Inca Empire, the A-Class, also known as the Chosen Women or Virgins of the Sun. The Inca world was one of strict order and divine power, where the Sapa Inca was seen as a living god. In Tis world, the concept of purity wasn't just a virtue, it was a source of immense power. And it was this belief that shaped the destinies of thousands of young girls across the empire. So, who were the and how were they chosen? The selection process was meticulous and began when girls were very young, typically between the ages of 8 and 10. Imperial officials, called Apyapanica, traveled to every corner of the vast Inca territory, from the coastal plains to the high mountain villages. Their mission was to find the most perfect girls. What did perfect mean to the Incas? It was a combination of things. Physical beauty was paramount. They looked for unblemished skin, symmetrical features, and what they considered an ideal form. But beauty wasn't enough. These girls also had to be in perfect health and, perhaps most importantly, show a disposition of obedience and intelligence. They were looking for girls who were not only beautiful but also malleable, easy to shape into the ideal servants of the state and the gods. For a young girl, being selected was a moment that changed everything. One day you were a child playing in your village. The next, you were property of the Inca Emperor. Your childhood, as you knew it, was over. Once chosen, these young girls were taken from their families and escorted to the Aclla, or House of the Chosen Women. These were special convents, with the most magnificent one located in the capital city of Cusco, right next to the Coricancia, the Temple of the Sun. Imagine being a 10-year-old, leaving everything you've ever known behind, and entering this grand, imposing building that would become your entire world. Life inside the Acllahuasi was one of discipline, training, and seclusion. The girls were cut off from the outside world, their lives dedicated to serving the empire. They were under the strict supervision of elder women known as mamakunas, who acted as their teachers and guardians. The mamakunas were often former A-class themselves, and they were responsible for instructing the girls in the sacred arts. So, what did they learn? Their education was rigorous and highly specialized. A huge part of their duty was weaving, but this wasn't just any weaving. The Acllahuasi produced the finest textiles in the entire empire. They wove with vicuna wool, which was softer than silk, and reserved exclusively for the Sapa Inca and the highest nobility. They created intricate tapestries, ceremonial robes, and tunics that were considered more valuable than gold. These textiles were not just clothing. They were symbols of status, power, and religious devotion. They were given as high-level diplomatic gifts and used as offerings to the gods. The girls also learned to brew chicha, a sacred corn beer that was essential for every single religious festival and ceremony. Mastering the art of brewing the perfect chicha was a crucial skill. Beyond these practical tasks, they were also trained in religious rites and chants, preparing them for their roles in the empire's complex ceremonial life. Their days were structured, filled with work, prayer, and study, all within the silent, stone walls of the Acllahuasi. But not all low-class shared the same fate. Within the Acllahuasi, there was a strict hierarchy, and the girls were destined for different paths based on their beauty, lineage, and skills. The most beautiful and high-born girls were destined for the highest honors. Some were consecrated as mamakunas, the wives of the sun, dedicating their entire lives to the service of the sun god, Inti. They lived in perpetual chastity, acting as priestesses and maintaining the sacred fires in the temples. They were the most revered of all the Acllahuasi, seen as earthly embodiments of divine purity. Another group was reserved for the Sapa Inca himself. They could become his secondary wives or concubines, a position of great prestige. To bear a child of the Sapa Inca was the highest honor a woman could achieve. Then there were the A-class, who were given as wives to other men. But these weren't just any men. The Sapa Inca would award an Aclla as a wife to Karakazarija, Lidazor, to valiant warriors and officials as a sign of supreme favor. This was a brilliant political move. It created unbreakable bonds of loyalty between the provincial elites and the central power in Cusco. Marrying a woman who had been raised in the heart of the Inca state ensured that a powerful regional leader's household was, in essence, an extension of the emperor's own influence. This practice helped to unify a vast and diverse empire, weaving a web of kinship and obligation that held the Tawantinsuyo, the Inca realm, together. For the women, this meant leaving the seclusion of the Acllahuasi and re-entering the world. But as wives of powerful men, their lives still bound by duty and service to the state. Now we must turn to the darkest and most chilling fate that could befall a chosen woman: human sacrifice. This was known as the Kapa Coca ceremony. While it wasn't the fate for most Acllahuasi, it was the ultimate expression of their purpose. Only the most physically perfect and pure girls were selected for this ritual. The Incas believed that by sacrificing the most perfect being they could offer, they were sending their best emissary to the gods. This was done during times of great crisis, like a famine, a plague, the death of an emperor, or a military victory. The selected girl, often just a teenager, would be treated like a living deity in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. She would be dressed in the finest clothes, feasted, and honored. Then, she would begin a long pilgrimage, sometimes hundreds of miles, to a sacred high altitude mountain peak. Priests would accompany her on this final journey. Once at the summit, she would be given a large amount of chicha to drink, which would lull her into a deep, intoxicated sleep. Then, she would be left to the elements, to freeze in the icy air of the Andes, or sometimes killed by a single blow to the head. The Incas didn't see this as murder. They believed these girls were not truly dying but were transitioning to the world of the gods, where they would live forever and intercede on behalf of their people. The discovery of remarkably well-preserved mummies of these sacrificed children, like Tefarmos, maiden of Lulalaco, gives us a hauntingly personal look into this practice. Scientific analysis of her hair revealed her diet changed dramatically in the year before her death. She began eating elite foods like maize and llama meat, confirming the historical accounts of how these victims were prepared for their final journey. It is a stark reminder of the absolute power the Inca state held over individual lives and the profound, and to us, terrifying, depths of their religious convictions. The purity that got these girls chosen in the first place was also what made them the perfect offering to the divine. The story of the A-class is a story of contrasts. It's about beauty and brutality, honor and servitude, life and death. These women were simultaneously revered and imprisoned. They were the weavers of power, the brewers of ritual, and the political pawns of an empire. Their lives, dedicated to the service of the sun and the Inca, were a testament to the intricate social and religious machinery that made the Inca Empire one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. They were chosen for their perfection, but this perfection came at a steep price. Their freedom, their families, and for some, their very lives. Their story forces us to look beyond the golden temples and grand stone cities and see the human stories, the individual lives that were woven into the fabric of this incredible and complex culture. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the Inca Empire. What do you find most fascinating or disturbing about the Acllahuasi? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the hidden histories of the world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.